Karen Monroe thought she could do whatever she wanted, including illegally chopping down a century-old tree that wasn't even on HOA property. Armed with arrogance and a blinding sense of entitlement, she stood there, smirking, as Mark watched his beloved oak get hacked to pieces. But karma had other plans, and when the final cut sent the massive trunk crashing straight through Karen's own roof, the game changed. And trust me, you won't believe how it all ended. Mark Henderson had always considered himself a patient man, a level-headed, take a deep breath before you react type of guy. But there were limits, and as he stood barefoot in his front yard, watching the towering oak tree that had shaded his family for generations get ripped apart by whirring chainsaws, he felt something deep in his gut snap. The morning had started peacefully, birds chirping, the smell of coffee still lingering in the air. Then came the grind, the brutal mechanical roar that sent every nerve in his body into high alert. He had jolted out of bed, heart racing, barely registering the clock that read 6:47 a.m. before sprinting to the window. And that's when he saw it. His tree, his century-old, thick-trunked, deeply rooted oak, being savaged by men in neon vests with gas-powered saws. At the foot of the destruction, standing with the smug authority of a queen surveying her conquered lands, was Karen Monroe. Of course it was Karen, the HOA president, the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards. A woman who wielded minor authority like a medieval warlord, treating property lines like battlefronts and front yard decorations like acts of war. Mark didn't even remember running outside. One second, he was standing at the window, and the next, he was storming across his lawn, rage bubbling up with every step. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice echoed down the quiet cul-de-sac, loud enough to wake the dead. Karen turned leisurely, as if he had just interrupted her morning yoga, not caught her committing blatant property destruction. "Oh, good morning, Mark," she chirped, flashing a tight, artificial smile, the kind that belonged on a plastic mannequin. Mark's fists clenched so hard his nails dug into his palms. "This is my tree, on my property." Karen's expression didn't change. Not anymore, it was a violation. He stared at her, momentarily speechless. A violation? Of what? She let out a breathy, patronizing laugh, like he was a child throwing a tantrum over bedtime. "Mark, we have guidelines in this neighborhood. The oak was far too large. It disrupted the aesthetic balance of the street." Aesthetic? He nearly choked on the word. "I'm not even in the HOA." Karen shrugged, her arms folding across her chest. "That doesn't matter. You are part of this community, and this community has rules." A fresh whine of a chainsaw cut through the morning air. Mark barely had time to turn before another massive branch came crashing down, splintering against the pavement. The impact was so powerful, it sent a shudder through the ground. His mailbox nearly got decapitated. His vision went red. "You have no legal right to do this." His voice was dangerously low now, cold and sharp. "Where's the permit?" Karen just grinned wider. "We don't need one. We're the HOA." Mark swore he could hear the capital letters in her voice. For a split second, he envisioned 1,000 ways this could go. None of them were legal, so he did the only thing he could do. He pulled out his phone. Karen's grin didn't falter. If anything, it grew. "Oh, go ahead," she trilled, waving her hand dismissively. "Call the cops. By the time they get here, this tree will be gone." And she wasn't wrong. By the time Mark's fingers hit 911, the trunk, his beautiful, towering oak, had already been sawed into thick, crumbling logs. By the time he finished explaining the situation to the emergency dispatcher, the last remaining stump was being loaded onto a truck. His tree, his beloved tree, was now a pile of firewood. But Karen had made one massive mistake. Because karma was about to arrive in full force. The last thick base of the trunk stood upright, about 12 feet tall, swaying just slightly. It loomed there, heavy and unstable, a monument to Karen Monroe's hubris. Mark stood frozen, his fists clenched at his sides. His blood boiled with fury, but some instinct, told him to wait, to watch. Karen, oblivious as ever, folded her arms across her chest, looking up at the massive trunk like a conquered enemy, as if this was her victory, her final, petty triumph. A landscaper stepped forward, revving his chainsaw. the mechanical whine cutting through the air like a battle cry. He positioned himself at the base, knees bent, focus locked, and then he cut. The saw bit into the wood with a deep, snarling growl. And then a low, groaning sound echoed through the yard. Mark's breath caught. The workers hesitated. Karen didn't. "Keep going," she snapped, like a queen demanding execution. "Finish it off." The chainsaw pushed deeper. The trunk shuddered. And then it moved, but not forward. Not where they expected. Backward. Right toward Karen's house. Mark's stomach dropped. "Oh, crash." The entire trunk came down like a wrecking ball. The sheer weight of it obliterated everything in its path. Shingles exploded into the air. Wooden beams snapped like matchsticks. The front porch caved in with a monstrous roar, sending debris flying in every direction. For a second, there was nothing but stunned silence. Then, "My house!" Karen's piercing shriek cut through the dust cloud. "My beautiful house!" She stumbled forward, hands in her hair, staring at the wreckage like it had personally betrayed her. The workers, they ran. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just pure survival instincts kicking in. Mark just stood there, watching, in awe. It was poetic, a divine act of justice. And Karen, she was losing it. Her eyes, wild and furious, locked onto Mark like he had somehow willed this into existence. You did this." Mark arched a brow, crossing his arms. "Me? You ordered the tree to be cut down, Karen." His voice was calm, deadly calm. Her lip quivered. You need to pay for this." Mark's expression didn't change. He let the moment stretch, let her panic sink in. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "Oh, don't worry," he said smoothly, holding it up. "The insurance company is going to love this story." And then, just for dramatic effect, he started recording. By the time the cops arrived, Karen Monroe had gone full nuclear. Her once perfectly styled hair was a frizzed-out mess from all her wild gesturing. Her face was red and blotchy from screeching like a banshee, and her voice? Completely unhinged. She wasn't just angry, she was desperate, throwing every accusation she could grasp at, hoping something would stick. "He did this on purpose. This was tree terrorism. It's a hate crime," she shrieked, jabbing a trembling, manicured finger at Mark. "I want him arrested." "Nah, that's it." The responding officer, a middle-aged guy with the exhausted expression of a man who had dealt with one too many HOA meltdowns in his career, just sighed. "Ma'am," he said, rubbing his temple, "you illegally cut down his tree." Karen froze. For the first time since this whole catastrophe started, she had nothing to say. Mark, standing just a few feet away with a calm, amused expression, pulled out his phone and casually held it up. "I have the whole thing on video," he said smoothly, tapping the screen. "Every smug little order, every time you told them to keep going, every moment where you made it crystal clear that you knew exactly what you were doing." Karen's jaw tightened. Before she could even open her mouth, Mark added, "And before you even try to claim I planted the tree just to frame you?" He let out a low chuckle. "I have 30 years of property records. Want to keep digging this hole, or should we let the judge handle it?" The officer scrolled through the footage, his neutral expression shifting into something that almost resembled disbelief. Then he turned to Karen and sighed heavily. "Well, Karen," he said, his tone practically dripping with boredom, "looks like you're the one facing charges." Karen let out a sound, a strangled, gurgling mix between a gasp and the dying scream of a seagull. "Charges? I'm the victim." The officer didn't even flinch. "No, ma'am," he said dryly. "You trespassed. You illegally ordered the destruction of private property, and now you're liable for the damages." Karen's body locked up. Her entire face went pale. You can't be serious," she stammered, glancing wildly between the officer and Mark, like she was hoping someone, anyone, would suddenly come to her rescue. But the only thing she saw on Mark's face, a slow, satisfied smirk. "Oh, I'm dead serious, Karen," he said, stepping just a little closer, lowering his voice just enough that only she could hear. "And I'll be suing for damages," Karen screeched. But Mark just smiled. Lawn chairs lined the sidewalks. People clutched cups of coffee like they were front row seats to the most satisfying show in town. Kids rode their bikes up and down the street, eyes wide with excitement, while neighbors whispered in hushed, almost gleeful tones, because today was demolition day. Karen Monroe's once imposing, self-proclaimed crown jewel of the cul-de-sac was now an uninhabitable wreck. The massive oak tree she had so proudly ordered to be chopped down had done more than just smash through her roof. It had caved in part of the second floor, crushed the front porch, and cracked the foundation. The structure had been deemed unsafe for occupancy, and since Karen had zero insurance coverage for its acts of sheer stupidity, there was no saving it. Her beloved home, the one she had used as her throne of HOA tyranny, was about to be reduced to rubble, and everyone was here to watch. Karen stood in her cracked driveway, arms crossed, seething. Dark bags hung under her eyes. Her usually flawless bob looked like she'd been running her fingers through it for days. She had fought the city, filed appeals, screamed at her insurance company, even tried blaming Mark and the aggressive stance of the tree in a desperate attempt to find a loophole. Nothing worked, because the truth was on video. The moment the insurance adjusters saw the footage of her grinning while ordering the landscapers to cut the tree down, they denied her claim outright. No legal technicalities could save her. And now, as the bulldozers rolled onto the street, Karen looked like a woman on the verge of a breakdown. Mark stood on his front lawn, coffee in hand, watching the scene unfold. His 100-year-old oak tree was gone, sure, but karma had planted something even better in its place, a brand new memory, one that he would cherish forever. Karen's burning stare finally locked onto him. Her lips pressed so tightly together, they turned white. Her fists clenched. The look on her face was pure hatred, like if she glared hard enough, she could somehow reverse the last 3 weeks and make all this go away. Mark just lifted his coffee cup, and with a slow, deliberate motion, he waved. Karen's face twisted in rage, but before she could say a word, crash. The first bulldozer rammed into the side of her broken home, sending a shower of bricks and debris tumbling to the ground. Karen let out a strangled noise, a mix between a gasp and a scream. Another loud boom echoed through the street as the second bulldozer pushed straight through the front of the house, collapsing the already unstable porch in a cloud of dust. A few neighbors cheered. Someone started clapping. Karen whirled toward them, her face red. "Are you all seriously celebrating this?" Silence. Then, one brave voice called out from the crowd. "Shouldn't have cut down the tree, Karen." Laughter rippled through the neighborhood. Karen spun back toward Mark, shaking with fury. "This is your fault," she screeched. "I will sue you." Mark took a slow sip of his coffee. "Uh-huh," he said, nodding toward the wreckage. "You go ahead and let me know how that works out for you." Another boom. The roof finally gave way, collapsing inward in a thunderous crash. A thick cloud of dust billowed into the sky. Karen staggered back, her eyes wide, watching her reign of HOA terror crumble into nothing. And Mark just smiled. Because justice had never tasted so sweet.